is the role of a director with Verite? How do you work with the camera person and give them direction when things are happening and you don't want to disrupt what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a key decision, which is why I think it's so important, if you're not shooting it yourself, who is your collaborator in the field. And actually on Charm City, my main DP, we gave him a co-producing credit because it was so pivotal at times. So in a normal relationship, you're going to you'll look at their reels and you'll see how they shoot and try to get a sense. But for Verite, you really have to get inside each other's brains and talk about the project and know that they understand what you're trying to evoke with certain characters or situations or stories, and they need to be able to, kind of probe at that often. Like, okay, so if I'm in this situation, then what? Because sometimes it is unfolding and you're going to ruin it if you're kind of walking up to them and whispering. You've actually seen that shot where a camera suddenly goes, and it's like someone walked up to them and was like, what about? But actually in the case of Charm City, at some point it became clear that it was easier for me not to be there for certain scenes, which we could, wade into. But so then I really had to put my faith. It was primarily on the community side, and I really had to put my faith in Andre. And I wound up very often, I was in town and watching dailies at night, and then we would talk about what was going on, and then I would, say, okay, why don't we pivot that way? And I was the one setting up the, who's waiting for us to show up with the camera. So I was in touch with everybody and was deciding when we'd go, but I wasn't always the one who could be in the field. So, that opening...
Was there a sound person too?
Sometimes. It really got to the point on the community side that it was just Andre. It just was hard. As violence got harder, and there's a lot of skepticism in the community, rightly so. This bad coincidence happened where our very first shoot on Charms... Can I wade in on this or no?
Yeah.
So if you remember the scene of the block party where we went to go film the birthday party and the block party, and then this domestic violence dispute, spills into the street. And we were there with kind of a big crew. It was our first shoot. And so we were really let's be diligent about our sound. And I was kind of moving around because we were also filming on the police side. So there was probably 4 of our bodies in the space. And 3 weeks later, totally coincidentally, there was a raid on the block. And we were the only ones they hadn't known before. So it became clear, even though they understood we had nothing to do with that, it became clear that, anything that kind of changed the ecosystem was potentially hazardous for the subjects. And so, first principle always is do no harm. And so, that's when you take your ego out of it and say, okay, so what is it that they need? They were interested in telling their story. They were very committed to being a part of a film that allowed them to share their own stories, where often they're never heard. And so that was the trust relationship we had to build over very many months of how do we give them the space and safety and security to be able to tell that story. So yeah, you're not always there on a Verite film.
Did the camera person ask questions while shooting, or it was strictly Verite?
It was pretty strictly Verite. I mean, I was almost always the ride along on the police. Actually, there was periods where Miriam, the co-producer, was, and so I set the rules do not ask the cops to explain to you what's happening, because then you get into that cops. Literally, that show, the cops mentality is now we're breaking in the door. Now we're doing something. You're going to kill your Verite. So I said, let's just err on the side of we'll figure it out later, but don't do it in the scenes. Shoot what you need to shoot, and we'll figure it out. And so we would occasionally, and this was always me, I'd watch the footage and then we'd cut scenes and then we'd figure out, okay, we need an interview.